Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to my salute to the 1930s. I have decided to do things a little bit differently than I set out to do. I'd originally thought I would cover year by year, but that just doesn't strike me, particularly after I did 1930 and I realized that video didn't get a lot of traction, probably because, except for All Quiet on the Western Front, no one really watches movies made in 1930 anymore, at least not English language movies made in 1930. But then we move on to 1931, and suddenly we start to have some classics. But I also noticed something special about 1931, and that is this is the year that the Universal horror cycle was born. So I thought instead of going year by year, I'm going to highlight the movies that I love, my favorite movies in different particular genres. So, since 1931 saw the beginning of the Universal horror cycle, I am going to begin by highlighting my top 10 favorite horror movies of the 1930s. Starting off with some honorable mentions. Some movies that I really like that didn't quite make the cut. The Black Cat with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. It is one of the most disturbing films of this period. And in fact, it provoked audiences and certain persons of moral rectitude to keep a closer eye on movies in the genre after that. But I've only seen it once, so it doesn't quite make my favorites list. Mystery of the Wax Museum, made in 1933. This movie has been overshadowed to a great extent by its 1956 remake, House of Wax. But I've seen both these movies, and the best thing, there are two things that are really good about House of Wax. One is Vincent Price. He's amazing. This, in fact, was the movie that cemented his status as a horror star. And then there is the scene with the paddleball guy. And if you've seen House of Wax, then you know what I mean by the paddleball guy. If you haven't seen House of Wax, you really should, because it's a good movie. But I think Mystery of the Wax Museum is just a little bit better because it is an example of a pre-code movie. The production code was around at this time, but it was not strictly enforced to the degree that it would be from 1934 onward. And so that kind of pre-code grittiness, it's not as pretty a film as House of Wax, but it is more disturbing, a little bit scarier. And I really do like Glenda Farrell's female lead. You really don't find in horror movies from this period many female characters who are all that interesting, but Glenda Farrell's reporter is one of the few. In fact, I think this probably would have made the cut and ended up in my top 10 if it hadn't been for the fact that it has the worst ending ever. Or one of them. Another really good one is Dracula's Daughter with Gloria Holden, one of the few female monsters we see from this period. Another movie called Mad Love, starring Peter Lorre as an insane scientist who amputates the hands of the husband of the woman he loves after the man gets in a railroad accident. And instead, and he doesn't just give him any old hands, he gives him the hands of a recently executed knife-throwing serial killer. Then there's Freaks, and that movie is so disturbing that it practically doesn't even need a plot. It is not an extremely accessible movie for those who are not really used to movies of the 1930s, but it certainly does give you a shivery feeling in the stomach and a sense of unease from the very beginning of its runtime. Another good one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the 1931 version with Frederick March. Again, there was a remake in 1941 with Spencer Tracy, which has its virtues, but the grittiness and the permissiveness of the pre-code era really, I think, suits this story well. And then we have, for the last of my honorable mentions, 1939's Son of Frankenstein. This was the last film in which Boris Karloff played Frankenstein's monster. This movie really doesn't belong to him. It's really more Bela Lugosi's film. He plays the crook-necked shepherd Igor, who is who has hypnotized the monster and is basically commanding the monster to murder in revenge all the jury that sentenced him to hang for grave robbing. Because somehow he managed to survive the hanging, but he has the scar on his neck to prove it. And so he is twisting the monster to his own nefarious ends. And it's really a great performance. I actually think I like his performance here even better than his performance in Dracula that made him a star. But Lugosi did not have as many really great roles and as many great films to his credit as Boris Karloff did. Karloff had a much longer career, I think partly because he was easier to work with. People wanted to work with Boris Karloff. But Lugosi was a bit more difficult, a bit more temperamental. But when he's on, he is very on, and he is very on and super charismatic and wonderfully evil in Son of Frankenstein. So those are my honorable mentions. I will not, I can tell already, be able to get through all 10 of my top 10 in the time period that YouTube allows me. So this will be part 1. So what did make my top 10? Now understand that this is a personal favorites list. This is not necessarily a list of the objectively best horror films of the 1930s. If it were a list of the objectively best, it would probably look a little bit different. So these are just ones that I personally have a great deal of affection for, or have a little bit of extra affection for, above and beyond the movies that I listed in my honorable mentions. So number 10 is The Devil Doll, made in 1936, directed by Todd Browning, who also directed Dracula back in 1931, and starring Lionel Barrymore as an escaped convict. He was sent to prison for a crime he did not commit, set up by his banking partners, and now that he has escaped, he has, as you might suspect from this kind of film, he has revenge on his mind. So he teams up with a woman, the wife of a scientist, who has discovered a formula for shrinking people. And in their partnership, he disguises himself as the owner, an old lady who is the owner of a toy shop. And Barrymore's performance in this is absolutely brilliant. And for those who really want a good sense of what Lionel Barrymore can do, aside and apart from Mr. Potter and It's a Wonderful Life, take a look at The Devil Doll, because it really is an amazing performance. It's got a decent supporting cast, and Raffaella Otiani is also very good as his partner in crime, who is Lionel Barrymore in this movie is something of an anti-hero. You feel sorry for him. But Raffaella Otiano is unhinged and she needs to be stopped. So, another rather compelling female villain for 1930s horror. So, that's one to check out. Number 9 on my list is another 1936 film called The Walking Dead. This one doesn't really get a lot of press. A lot of people who've heard of it confuse it with the HBO/HBO Max series about zombies, but it's not that. Instead, we have Boris Karloff, yet another man who has been brought back. In this case, he has been executed for a crime he did not commit, and he's brought back to life by Edmund Gwenn as the not mad scientist but super experimental, think outside the box kind of scientist. And when he is brought back to life, he has more insight than he did when he was previously alive. He recognizes the people who did this to him, and he also is out for revenge, but he does it in a very quiet way. It's hard to describe. Basically, all he needs to do is show up, present himself to the men who did him wrong, and somehow they end up destroying themselves. But it is actually a very beautiful, understated, and very sympathetic performance from Boris Karloff. I am a huge Boris Karloff fan. I have been ever since I saw How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the Chuck Jones version back in the 70s. So Karloff's narration, I loved that voice. I've been interested. His name in a movie is almost enough to get me to sit through almost anything. I know I use the word almost way too much in that sentence, but still, I'm very much a Karloff fan. I think he's a tremendously underrated actor, and his performance in this is rather heartbreaking. So if you want to see Karloff in perhaps his most sympathetic performance, it may take some hunting, because this movie is not very accessible. They don't make it easy for you to find. But if you can find it, it is worth the search. It's called The Walking Dead. It's directed, I believe, by Michael Curtiz, of all people, the same guy that directed Casablanca and most of the Errol Flynn films from the 30s. So, and he had a very, very long career. So give it a look if you can find it. Now, it's coming up on 14 minutes. I'm running out of time. So I will start again with number 8 and get that up on YouTube for you.